Today we are starting Chapter 7 with Section 7.1. Chapter 7 actually goes pretty quick. There's 2 lessons in there that we don't do, so it'll just be a couple weeks on Chapter 7, then we'll go into Chapter 8. But we are starting Chapter 7 with the lesson on ratios and proportions. Today is pretty algebra heavy. There's not a lot of things that I would label as geometry in here. The geometry is going to come into play tomorrow. So our objective for today is just to use ratios and proportions. It should feel like a review for a lot of you, hopefully. If not, we'll go over it enough that you'll get it this time around, hopefully. Here is what you need to know about ratios. So the definition of a ratio, it's a comparison of a number and a non-zero number using division. So you cannot have a 0 on the bottom is what that fancy non-zero part means. So you're just comparing 2 numbers using division. You could also use these various ways to do it. So you could use the word 2, you can use the fraction, or you can use the colon. These all mean the exact same thing. So these are just the 3 different ways to write a ratio. And a ratio is just a comparison of 2 numbers. In all of these, no matter which way you write it, the b part can't be 0. So just be aware of that as well. So we simplify ratios the same way we reduce fractions. So you basically just find a number that goes into both of them and use division. If you have a calculator, you can actually use the ABC button. It'll do all the hard work for you. So if you're using a calculator, you could just type 60, the ABC button, 200 equals, and it'll reduce it for you. Just change it back to the way it was written in the problem. Don't make them all fractions unless it specifies to do that. If you do not have a calculator, though, how would we reduce this? Anyone know? What's a number that goes into 60 and 200? They both end in 0, right? So we can start with 10. So I'm going to divide both of them by 10 and then see what I can do from there. So 60 divided by 10 is 6. 200 divided by 10 is 20. So that was a good start, but it doesn't look like we're done, right? Is there a number that goes into both of those? They're both even. So that means 2 goes into both of them. So that's going to be 3 centimeters and 10 centimeters. Again, you can do it on the calculator. It'll do all that division for you. You just have to know which button to push. Anyone need help on the calculator? Now, this only works when they have the same label. So if you have something like this where you have 3 feet and 18 inches, you need to change one of them. So do you want to change 18 inches to feet, or do you want to change 3 feet to inches? I think the 3 feet to inches would be easier. How many inches are in 1 foot? 12. So if I wanted to change 3 feet into inches, I would just multiply that by 12. What is 3 times 12? 36. So there are 36 feet, 36 inches in 3 feet. Now that they're both in terms of inches, you can reduce them. What's the number that goes into both? 36 and 18. 6 goes into both. Good. So you can divide the top by 6, divide the bottom by 6. So you get 6 inches over 3 inches. Can you go again? 3 goes into both of them still, right? So you got to keep going until there's no more reducing that you can do. So 2 inches over 1 inch. Questions? Now, ratios are kind of like fractions. Anytime you can reduce, you should reduce. So just be aware of that on your homework as you're going through them. If it looks like it can be reduced, go ahead and double check to see if it can before you turn in your final answer. Alright, the last one. We can go 12 feet. We can change that into terms of yards, or we can change 5 yards into feet. Anyone have a preference? I think the 5 yards is probably easier. How many feet are in 1 yard? 3. So to figure out how many are in 5 yards, I just multiply 5 by 3. So that's 12 feet over 15 feet, and then you can reduce. What's the number that goes into 12 and 15? 3. And there you go. What questions do you guys have? No questions?
How do you type it on the calculator?
How do you type that in on the calculator?
Yeah.
The ABC button?
Yeah.
So like 12, and then there's a button that looks like A, B, C, and then 15, and then you hit the equal sign and it will reduce it. Alright, so the key here lies in the directions. This says that segment DE has a ratio to EF of 1 to 2. So like for every inch you have here, you'd have 2 inches here. Or for every foot you have here, you'd have 2 feet here. So if this one was 1, this one would be 2. If this one was 2, this one would be 4. If this one was 5, this one would be 10. Okay? So we need to use some variables. Remember, when we don't know something in math class, we use variables. So if I call this one X, what would I need to call this one? It would be 2 times that length. So it would be 2X. And then here's another clue for this problem. The entire length of that segment is 45. So if I took the smaller one, X, and I added the bigger one, 2X, I should have a length of 45. And then you just solve that to find your X. What is X plus 2X? Wake up, guys. 3X equals 45. When you solve for X, what do you get? 15. So that means that DE, since it was X, is just 15. And then what would EF be? It'd be twice that length. So what's 2 times 15? 30. And then double check. Do those add together to give you a length of 45? Yeah, so you know you did it right. Okay? So again, the key is to use that ratio, assign some variables, and then solve an equation. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, so in this problem, we are given a few numbers in the directions. We are given the number of games that this team has won and the number of games that this team has lost, and we're asked to write some ratios. So the first one we want to write is wins to losses. Whatever they ask for first is going to be the first number we use. So which number represents wins? 10. So my first number will be 10. 10 wins. You can write 10W if you'd like. And then I want the losses. What are my losses? 7. Good. That is the ratio of wins to losses. Double check to see if you can reduce. If you can't, just leave it. Part B, losses to wins. So now I want losses first. What's my losses? So now I want the 7 to be first, and then the 10. Now, C is where it's just a little bit trickier. I want wins first, so which number is wins? 10. Then I want the number of games played. How many games did they play? 17. So 17G for games. How'd you get 17? Yeah, if you won 10 of them and you lost 7 of them, assuming there are no ties, that means you played 17 games total. So you got to be careful what they're asking and write it in the order that they asked for. What are your questions on number 5? All right, here's some additional information for you. I told you were learning 2 things today, ratios and proportions. Here's where the proportions start. A proportion is just an equation that has 2 ratios that are equal. So you have a ratio on one side of the equal sign, a ratio on the other. Additional vocabulary terms you need to know. Means, those are the numbers here, the second and third. If you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, the second and third entry would be the means. And then the first and fourth, those are the extremes. So these are the extremes over here. These are the means. If you were writing them in order, the means would be in the middle. That's how I always remember it. MM, means in the middle. And then extremes are on the outside. And then down here, the cross product property. A lot of you know this as cross multiplying. You multiply the extremes, you multiply the means, and you set them equal to one another. So you just multiply across equals what you get when you multiply across. So we're going to look at a couple of examples on this. Our review on Wednesday is a whole lot of cross multiplying, so it's not something we spend a ton of time on today, but we will revisit it on Wednesday. So be aware of that. This should look familiar. Do you guys remember cross multiplying? Probably spent a lot of time in algebra doing it, so hopefully this isn't too new, but if it is, we'll go over it. Any questions? So, when we cross multiply, we just multiply across the equal sign. So I'm going to start at the 3 and I'm going to go down to the 8. What's 3 times 8? 24. Good. Then you multiply across the other way, so now x times 6. What's x times 6? 6x. Those 2 expressions are equal to one another. How do you solve an equation like that? Divide by 6. So we get that 4 equals x. That is our answer. What are your questions on that one? Alright, same process on number 7. So where do I start and where do I go? Yeah, start with the 2, go down to the W. That's 2W. Then you have your equal sign. Then what? Yeah, 7 times 8, which is 56. Then you divide by the 2. And what does W equal? 28. Good. Now, if you want to check your work, you can put the 28 in for the W. Or you can put the 4 in for the x and see if it makes sense. 3/4 is the same thing as 6/8 when you reduce, right? So that makes sense. If you put the 28 right here, 4 would go into both of them. It would reduce to 2/7 as well. So you can double check these just by plugging it in and reducing the fraction. That usually works. Not always. Sometimes if there's weird decimals in there, it doesn't quite work out. But usually it does. So you can check it in and plug it in and check, especially if you're unsure. Now, we will get into harder cross-multiplying problems on Wednesday, but these are the basic ones that you will see on tonight's homework. Do you guys have any questions?